Hello everyone, this is Bill Griffin. Welcome to Different Take Podcast. If you like this content, please subscribe, like, share, comment. Really appreciate you watching. 2023, many economists and financial experts predict a recession in 2023. There's also some of these experts also predict or say that the inflation, CPI, will flatten out. But it's not unreasonable to think, because you can go back and look at this, and I'll talk about this a little later in the video, that this recession could turn into a severe recession and potentially a financial crisis. So along comes Congress last week. I think this was on December 23rd. They pass a $1.7 trillion Omnibus bill to keep the government running. And they always do this at the last minute. And the senators don't actually read it, but they vote for it. And so you had 18 Republican senators vote for this, and all the Democrats. And in the House, there were much less Republican support. Only 8 out of 200-something Republican members voted for this thing. $1.1 trillion debt. So this is how ABC News reported this on their telecast that night.
Congress taking steps to avoid another January 6th, in part by clarifying the vice president's role in certifying a presidential election as strictly ceremonial. It was approved just hours ago when the House passed a massive $1.7 trillion spending bill, also avoiding a government shutdown. Let's bring in ABC's congressional correspondent Rachel Scott. And Rachel, the bill getting some bipartisan support.
Yes, and there was strong bipartisan support to make changes to the Electoral Count Act. This is the very law that Trump tried to exploit on January 6th. So the revisions make it crystal clear that the vice president's role is completely ceremonial when overseeing the counting of electoral votes. All this part of that massive $1.7 trillion package to fund the government, which includes $45 billion for Ukraine, more than the administration asked for, $858 billion in military spending, including a pay raise for troops, and $40 billion in disaster aid for hurricanes, flooding, and wildfires. Only 9 Republicans in the House joined Democrats to pass this legislation. Their party takes the majority in the House in just a matter of weeks, Whit.
Rachel Scott, thank you.
Okay, 9 House members instead of 8. Notice this is all about avoiding a government shutdown. They don't mention $1.1 trillion in debt, and they certainly don't talk about the impact that this will have on the consumer price index or inflation. Instead, they spent time talking about Donald Trump. That was the big story, the Donald Trump story. Not the fact that we're staring at a recession and we have high inflation, and yet we're going to spend another $1.1 trillion. This is a portion of the CBS broadcast.
The appropriations process has failed the American public, and there's no greater example of the nail in the coffin of the greatest failure of a one-party rule of the House, the Senate, and the presidency of this bill here.
Why are some Republicans so opposed to this bill, not to mention passionate, as we just heard from McCarthy?
Well, again, it comes down to the level of spending and the view of some Republicans. They feel that this is wasteful spending, not necessarily all of it, but also in the case of House Republicans, for the most part, they felt that they were cut out of the negotiating process, ultimately.
In this clip, she talks about, well, the Republicans are upset because it's wasteful spending. And she implies that they're ticked off that they didn't get a seat at the table to get a cut of, get their interests taken care of, something for their district maybe, their state. So the implication is if you voted against this, it wasn't because you're not a pig, you just didn't get to the trough with the other pigs. So you have no mention in this 5-minute and 26-second report of the $1.1 trillion debt on top of what the United States debt is currently and whether that's a problem. There was no talking head coming on explaining how inflation is caused. There's no solution. And as if this has no impact on inflation. No mention of that correlation whatsoever. If you search ABC News or CBS News, maybe the others too, but you're not going to, if you search the word inflation in their, what their content will bring up, if you type in the search word inflation, you will not ever read what causes inflation or what the necessary solutions are. Inflation, Milton Friedman says, a monetary phenomenon. So you have monetary policy set by the Fed, and then you have fiscal policy. Congress has been abysmal. They have racked up so much debt. That is what is going to fuel this continuing inflationary spiral. As I said before, some experts expect the CPI to flatten out, even if it were to flatten out, which it's not going to, because it never flattens out if the Federal Reserve rate isn't higher than the CPI. It's never worked before. And there's no reason to think that it will work now. So you have exceptionally high inflation now, which apparently Congress is perfectly fine with. So I did a prior episode on this subject. I maintain that if you vote for Democrat, it's 100% you're voting for inflation. It's a good thing. Inflation's a good thing because that's what you voted for. All Democrats are on board with spending because that's their responsibility in this. The Fed enables Congress to do that. They've been doing this for many years with exceptionally low interest rates, and they've expanded the money supply. The big item in both these stories is, oh, thank God we avoided a government shutdown again. So this is Rand Paul expressing why the Republicans really voted against it, or many of them did.
So, Rand, you brought the bill. Why don't you go first? I brought with me the Omni, 4,155 pages. When was it produced? In the dead of the night, 1:30 in the morning when it was released. Now, people argue that it's conservatives' fault. You don't have the Christmas spirit. Somehow you're holding up government. Well, whose job is it to produce this? The people in charge of spending, the people in charge of both of the parties. When did they know that this would be necessary? Well, it's in the law, September 30th. You got 9 months, almost 10 months, to produce a plan, to have a spending plan. They weren't ready on September 30th. So they voted themselves 90 more days. They weren't ready last week either, so they voted themselves another week. And now we have it at 1:30 in the morning this morning. But what's the clamor? The clamor is to vote. Vote now. Let's get it done. Why are you standing in the way of spending? Well, the real question is this. What is more dangerous? What is more dangerous to the country? $1.1 trillion in new debt, or as Republican leadership likes to say, oh, but it's a win. It's a big win. We're getting $45 billion for the military. So which is more important? Which threatens the country more? Are we at risk for being invaded by a foreign power if we don't put $45 billion into the military? Or are we more at risk by adding to a $31 trillion debt? I think the greatest risk to our national security is our debt. The process stinks. It's an abomination. It's a no-good, rotten way to run your government. $6 trillion entity, and they want 24 hours to process this, and then they want to go forward. I will be demanding 2 amendments. One, that this goes against the budget rules. The pay-go rules say you can't do this. You can't have all this new spending unless it's offset. We will also be demanding that the pay-go rules are increased. Instead of taking 60 votes, to evade the rules, we're going to ask that it be a 2/3 vote to evade the rules. The American people don't want this. They're sick and tired of it. They're paying for it through the nose with inflation. Adding $1 trillion to the deficit will simply fuel the fires that are consuming our wages and consuming our retirement plans. It's a terrible system. Someone needs to stand up. We're standing up, and we're going to say no.
So of the 18 Republicans that voted for this thing, a lot of them are not surprises at all. You have Mitch McConnell, and I think a lot of these folks have a lot of loyalty to Mitch McConnell, but there are a few other folks that aren't surprises. John Cornyn, Texas. Lindsey Graham, he's going to vote for any war that funding that comes along. Doesn't matter where it's at or what it's about, he's going to vote for it. Lisa Murkowski, Rob Portman, Richard Shelby, Susan Collins. None of these folks really surprised me, except for two I noticed are probably pretty big surprises. Tom Cotton and John Boozman of Arkansas. So I'll start with Tom Cotton. This is a tweet. People are ticked off. It's a meme. It reads, "I'm Tom Cotton. Americans trusted me. I voted on a bill that will cripple Americans with more inflation. I want billions sent to foreign countries. I support protecting borders in other countries instead of protecting America. I am," the word Republican is crossed out, "rhino." So the last sentence, "I am rhino." People are very upset on his Twitter page, and they're responding to tweets that have nothing to do with the spending. And the reason you won't find any tweets that have anything to do with the spending is because there are none. So this was voted on, I think, December 22nd. It's December 28th, and Tom Cotton has tweeted 11,400 times is what his Twitter account shows. And when you look at his Twitter feed, you will see nothing explaining his vote. Nothing on his website, nothing. And of course, he's being called a coward because he does this. There is widespread condemnation in the responses to Tom Cotton's tweets. I'm looking at this December 28th. You have 2,049 comments on something that I guess he tweeted yesterday, the 27th. This is 6 days afterwards. There are 2,049 comments. I saw very few comments of support. They're all negative. I think it's pretty cowardly that he couldn't even explain the tweet and take it, because a lot of people are looking for explanations. A lot of folks in Arkansas are they feel betrayed. I'm not particularly surprised that he voted for this, but because that's what politicians do. But a lot of people that support him say they're not supporting him anymore and that he's going to be out and they're going to primary him. Well, surprisingly in Georgia, there's a primary challenge to John Raffensperger of all people, and he actually won his primary and is still Secretary of State in spite of being John Raffensperger. I'm sorry, I said Brad Raffensperger. That's how memorable he is. You easily forget his name. But the people in Arkansas are upset. This is a tweet from a constituent of his, I suppose. But she is referring, Patty Cake Patriot, she's referring to whether or not Tom Cotton is a corrupt person. What did they offer you, Tom? Or were you caught doing something naughty? Come on. The American people deserve to know what price you sold us out for. It's an interesting tweet because that's something that our media does not at all investigate. So you end up with these senators and very prominent House members and a lot of people in government. They end up very wealthy, and there's no questions about this at all. There's never any questions about it. From the press, they don't do much investigative reporting into that. So I don't think there's much question Tom Cotton's a coward, but is he corrupt? I think a lot of people would like to know what the motivation for doing such a thing, because his vote wasn't necessary. It was going to pass without him. The other senator from Arkansas, his name is John Boozman. He is being castigated on Twitter, and he's tweeting for voting for this $1.7 trillion Omnibus bill. So this is what someone has to say, this is Senator John Boozman's, the other senator from Arkansas who voted for this legislation. On December 22, today the House passed and sent to the President's desk my bill to designate the Butterfield Trail as a National Historic Park Trail. I thank all those, including my colleagues. I mean, this is the kind of thing he's tweeting, but he's not tweeting about why he voted for the $1.7 trillion. It's amazing that the media doesn't report on these kind of conflicts that happen all the time. I'll tell you about this, but I won't tell you about that. He's not as well known as Tom Cotton, so he didn't get as many tweets in response to this great legislation with the National Historic Trail that he's touting. 357 responses to that tweet, almost all negative. In one of the tweets, someone mentioned Asa Hutchinson, the governor of Arkansas, whose term's up, is running for president. He has the same chance of running as being elected, because he kind of falls in this, what a lot of people call the rhino camp. He has the same chance of being elected whether he campaigns or not. Zero. So why do these two men do this? A lot of their constituents, a lot of people across the country are probably scratching their heads at these two a bit, wondering how corrupt they are. Certainly both cowards, because they can't face the music. This is what you'll get if you call John Boozman's office.
Office of Senator John Boozman. The office is closed for the holidays. However, the office will open again on Tuesday, January 3rd. Our regular office.
So their office has been closed since the 23rd of December, open again January 3rd. They voted on this so they wouldn't have to answer the phones. Maybe. I don't know. But there's nobody to answer the phones, and people are pretty ticked off. The last, one of the interesting, when we talk about motivations, United States funding Ukraine. I'm going to talk about this in the next episode I'm going to do. Is that evil to engage in a proxy war at this sort of level against a country that we would be insane to go to war against? Russia? That just sounds really crazy. It would never work. It would never work. Look at the size of the two countries and their history, the military history of both countries. It's doubtful Russia's going to back out of Ukraine. We're just supporting death. We're supporting death by this thing continuing, or even doing what we could to prevent it in the first place, or at least not support death. Let those countries work that out. We're no obligation whatsoever to assist Ukraine. It doesn't affect the average citizen at all. But these two senators have no problem with this at all. For a lot of people, I think that would be a deal breaker, just based on that's not something you want to support, and the amount of money is staggering. So I'll talk about that in the next episode. I appreciate you watching. This is Different Take Podcast with Bill Griffin. Please subscribe, like, share, comment if you like the content. Thanks for watching.